The river didn't warn her. That was what Lark would remember long afterward. Not the cold, not the weight of the water dragging her pack into the green dark, but the silence before the canoe went sideways. 1 second she had been paddling. The next, the Horsefly River had her. She fought it. Of course she fought it. 31 years of being told she was resourceful and stubborn enough to outlast anything. That was hard to unlearn in 3 seconds of rushing current. She clawed toward the surface, broke through gasping, and immediately understood that the river was not interested in her opinions about her own survival. The bank, when she finally hauled herself onto it, was a strip of grey mud and frost-killed sedge grass. The trees above it, spruce and lodgepole pine, dark and indifferent, didn't offer anything. The sky was the color of old pewter, low and heavy with the kind of cloud that doesn't move. Lark sat in the mud and took stock. Canoe, gone. Pack, gone with it. The oilcloth-wrapped bundle that held her teaching certificate, her mother's letters, and every dollar she'd managed to keep after settling the debts her husband's accident had left behind. She still had the clothes on her back. She still had her boots. She still had a pocket knife with a broken tip. Good, she thought, through chattering teeth. I can die with my boots on. That was when she heard the horse. It came out of the tree line at a deliberate walk. A Percheron cross, dark bay, massive enough that its footfalls left real craters in the frost-softened ground. On its back sat a man who looked like he'd been carved from the same mountain the horse had probably descended from. Dark coat of heavy canvas and worn wool, a rifle across his thighs. A face, what she could see of it, above a black beard threaded with grey, that wore the expression of a man who had just discovered an inconvenient problem. He pulled the horse up 10 feet from her and looked at her for a long moment without speaking. She looked back at him, her teeth rattling loud enough to embarrass her. "River get you?" he finally said. "No," Lark said. "I just enjoy sitting in the mud in wet clothes in October." He didn't smile. He let out a short breath through his nose, not quite a sigh, not quite a grunt, and swung down from the horse. He was even larger on the ground. He moved toward her with the unhurried economy of someone who had no wasted motion in his entire body. He crouched in front of her, looked at her hands, looked at her face, looked at her boots. "Hands blue," he said. "I'm aware." "How long in the water?" "I don't know. A few minutes." He stood, looked at the river, looked at the sky, made some internal calculation she was not party to. "Camp's 4 hours up. You ride?" "Yes." What happened next was not graceful. The horse was 17 hands if it was an inch, and Lark's legs had apparently decided this was not their problem anymore. She got her foot in the stirrup. She pushed. The horse sidled 1 polite step to the side, and Lark went nowhere. The man stepped in behind her without comment. He grabbed her by the waist, both hands nearly spanning it, and boosted her upward. She caught the saddle horn. She tried to swing her leg over. Her knee refused, joints locked solid with cold, and she felt herself begin to slide back down the horse's left flank. There were bundles strapped behind the seat, rolled canvas, tied packs, hard and unyielding. She couldn't ride astride. There was nowhere to put her legs. "I can't," she started. "I know." He was already moving. He stepped up into the stirrup with 1 boot, and swung himself up behind her with a speed that had no business belonging to a man that size. His arm came around her waist from behind, clamping down like a timber brace. She was wedged in front of him, sitting sideways against the packs, her spine rigid, trying to hold herself upright and away from the wall of him behind her. "Stop fighting me," he said. His voice was low. It wasn't a request. Just lean back into it. Lark's jaw tightened. She held herself at an angle, teeth rattling. The horse started moving, and the first long rolling step nearly threw her forward. "Lean back," he said again, flat, tired, the voice of a man who would not say it a 3rd time. She let herself go. Her back hit his chest, and she understood immediately that it was not the pack behind her, it was him. All of it was him. The solid, unyielding mass of his torso, the arms on either side of her, the thick wool of his shirt radiating heat she could feel even through 2 layers of soaked clothing. She had been bracing against a man, not a bundle. He had been the wall the entire time. The realization sent something complicated and furious through her chest. And then the heat reached her spine, and she stopped caring about anything else. He didn't speak for the next 4 hours. He guided the horse along a route Lark could not see, a track through dense spruce forest that climbed steadily upward into the British Columbia interior. The cold bit at her wet face, and her ungloved hands, which she tucked against her own stomach beneath his arm, but her back was warm. Her back was so relentlessly, aggressively warm that she kept drifting toward unconsciousness and jerking herself back. His arm didn't loosen, not once. The cabin was small and ugly and completely without sentiment. It sat in a clearing hacked out of the spruce, the log walls black with age and pitch, the roof so heavily laden with lichen it looked like it was trying to grow back into the forest. A lean-to ran along one side for the horse. A stack of firewood reached the eaves. A tin stovepipe punched up through the roof at an angle that looked structurally inadvisable, but was probably just fine. He got her inside. She was unclear afterward on exactly how. By then she was shaking so violently that she had stopped being able to do anything useful with her own body. She had a memory of being lifted, of cold air, of a door, of darkness that smelled of spruce pitch and old smoke, and something animal and entirely male. He put her on a cot. She immediately tried to sit up. "Stay," he said. He didn't say her name because he didn't know it yet. He didn't know it for another 40 minutes, until after he had built a fire and cut her wet boots off with a folding knife, one precise slice through the laces on each, and begun the process of warming her hands and feet in a way that made her understand, viscerally, that the cold was the easy part. The thawing was not. He worked her right hand first, warming it in a basin of water that was startlingly cold, massaging her fingers with methodical brutality. She knew, dimly, that he was right to do it this way, something about frostbite and burst blood vessels and hot water. She knew this even as she made sounds she was not proud of, even as she pressed her face into the rough wool of the blanket he'd thrown over her, and told herself she was not going to cry. She cried. He didn't stop. He didn't try to comfort her. He just kept working, steady and implacable as the river that had almost kept her. "Name," he said at some point. She surfaced from the pain enough to answer. "Lark." He nodded once, moved to her left hand. "Dane," he said. That was the introduction. It took approximately 3 seconds. She thought through gritted teeth that it was the most efficient introduction she had ever received. 3 weeks passed. The snow came on the 4th day. Not a gentle early season dusting, but a real storm, the kind that arrives in the BC interior, like it owns the place. Because it does. It buried the woodpile, buried the world outside down to a white, silent room, with no walls and no floor. Lark learned the cabin. It was 16 feet by 18. It contained Dane's cot, a second cot he had dragged in from the lean-to for her, a cast-iron wood stove, a workbench covered in tools she couldn't name, a shelf of supplies, 2 chairs, and Dane. Dane was impossible to ignore, not because he was loud or demanding. He wasn't. He was the quietest person she had ever shared a space with. But he was so physically present, so solidly, unavoidably there, that navigating the cabin without being constantly aware of him was simply not possible. When he sat at the workbench in the evenings, his shoulders blocked the lamplight. When he stood at the stove, there was no room to pass without brushing against him. He filled the space not through carelessness, but through pure, unmitigated mass. Lark spent a great deal of energy during those first 2 weeks, pretending she was not constantly tracking exactly where he was. On the 11th day, she tried to help. She was mending his spare shirt. She'd offered to patch it as a way of paying for her keep, when she accidentally pulled the thread too hard and tore the seam she'd just sewn. The sound of it went through her like a rifle shot. She flinched, her whole body went rigid, her hands came up. Old reflex. She hated it, hated that her body still did that, still braced for the sounds that came after a mistake. The scrape of a chair, the particular quality of silence that meant something was about to happen to her. She waited. Dane looked up from the trap he was mending at the workbench. His dark eyes moved from the shirt in her hands to her face. He read something there. She could see it happen, the way he went very still. He looked at her raised hands. He turned back to his work without a word. He didn't mention it. He didn't step toward her. He didn't make any of the sounds she was braced for. He just picked up the trap spring and continued what he was doing, and after a long, suspended moment, Lark slowly lowered her hands. That night she heard him get up, sometime in the small hours. She heard him cross the cabin. She heard the stove creak as he added 2 more logs, quietly, and then cross back to his bedroll. He had noticed her shivering in her sleep and fed the fire without waking her. She lay in the darkness, staring at the ceiling for a long time after that, her chest full of something she didn't have a word for yet. She found the carving on a Thursday 3 weeks in. It was sitting on the corner of the workbench, small enough to fit in her palm. A bird carved from birch, the wood pale and smooth. Wings folded, head tilted slightly, in the particular way of a bird listening for something it can't quite hear yet. A lark. She picked it up. She turned it over in her hands. Dane was outside splitting wood. She could hear the axe. Steady, rhythmic, unhurried. She looked at the bird for a long time. Then she set it back exactly where she'd found it and went to stir the soup. She never said anything about it, neither did he. But the next morning it was on her cot, set carefully beside her pillow, and she put it in her coat pocket and wore it there every day after. The real storm hit in late November, and it announced itself by bringing down the lean-to wall. Not the whole structure. One side, the one that sheltered the horse from the northeast wind. A sheet of ice had built up under the snow until the weight snapped the upright log. Lark heard the crack from inside the cabin and was out the door in her coat and borrowed boots before she'd made any conscious decision to move. Dane was already there, knee-deep in snow, assessing. The horse stood in the back corner of the structure, looking mildly put out. "I need you to hold this," Dane said, without preamble. He pointed to a length of timber he'd already wedged under the sagging roof section. "Both hands. Don't let it move." He didn't ask if she was strong enough. He simply handed her the post and picked up a hammer and 2 long iron spikes. Lark grabbed the post with both hands and held. The wind was extraordinary. It came off the ridge in a sustained assault that made thinking difficult, that reduced the world to white noise and the physical fact of her arms shaking. The timber pushed back against her. Not much. But steadily, she planted her feet and leaned into it. "Hold," Dane said. She held. He drove the first spike with 3 strikes. She felt each one through the timber into her palms, and then moved to the second. 2 more strikes. The post locked. He grabbed the timber out of her hands, tested it, and nodded once. They went back inside without discussion. Later, when she had stopped shaking enough to hold a cup, he handed her tea and sat in his chair, and said nothing. For a long time she sat across the fire from him. Outside, the storm raged on, shaking the cabin in its fists. "Good hold," he said eventually. It was the most he had said about her in 3 weeks. She looked at him. He was looking at the fire. "Thank you," she said. He picked up a piece of wood to carve and didn't answer, but the set of his shoulders changed. Loosened, slightly, barely perceptibly. She noticed anyway, because she had been learning to read him the way you learn to read weather. Not through what was said, but through the small shifts that meant something was coming. The snow began pulling back in March, the way it always does in the Caribou. From the edges, reluctantly, leaving behind mud and dark standing water, and the smell of the earth breathing again. Lark woke one morning to the sound of dripping from the eaves, and felt a cold spike go straight through her stomach. She lay still, listening. The pass would open. The roads would clear. There was a supply settlement at the junction 2 days south, and from there a road to Williams Lake, and from Williams Lake a stage that ran east. She had come west with $40 and a teaching certificate. She had neither anymore, but she had herself, which was more than she'd had when she left Ontario, and the world was a very large place. She could go anywhere. Dane was already up, standing at the stove with his back to her. "Ice is off the lower creek," he said without turning around. "River'll be passable in 10 days, maybe 8. He was giving her a schedule. He was telling her when she could leave. Lark sat up and reached for the boots he'd made her from an old hide, a project he had undertaken without comment when it became clear her original boots were past repair. They fit with the particular precision of something made for her specifically, shaped to her arch, sized to her narrow heel. "I should think about what I'll need for the trip," she said. Dane put his cup down on the edge of the stove, not hard, just set it down. The small sound of it landed in the cabin like a stone in still water. He turned around slowly. He looked at her across the 12 feet of that small, smoke-dark room. His face was the same as always, closed, unreadable, blunt as a good tool. But something behind his eyes was different. She had been learning to read him for 3 months. "Where are you going, Lark?" "Williams Lake," she said quickly. "There'll be work. Teaching or—" "Williams Lake," he repeated, quiet, flat. "I have to," she started. She stopped. She had to what, exactly? Go back to the world that had taken everything she'd carried into it and handed her a frozen river instead. Go be sensible and employable in a town full of men who would look at a widow alone and see a problem to be managed. That was the world waiting on the other side of the pass. She had been pretending she was going towards something. She wasn't. She was simply not staying. The distinction had just become very clear. "I need to go," she said, and it came out wrong, ragged, too honest. "That's how this works. You found me and kept me through the winter, and now the snow's melting and I go. That's the shape of it." Dane crossed the cabin in 4 steps and stood in front of her. Close. She had to tilt her head back to look at him. "I didn't keep you through the winter," he said. His voice was very low. "You kept yourself. I just didn't leave you in the mud." "Dane." "There is nothing in Williams Lake that wants you." He said it without heat, with the absolute certainty of a man who had spent a long time being honest about the world. "But there's a trapline here that runs better with 2 people. There's a lean-to that needs rebuilding properly before next November." He stopped. His jaw tightened. He looked away for a moment, then back. "There's a carved bird in your coat pocket," he said. "And you've been carrying it for 2 months. Lark's breath caught. She had never told him she'd taken it. He had never asked. She looked at him, at the man who had pulled her from the mud, without tenderness, who had hurt her hands to save them, who had added wood to the fire in the middle of the night, and never mentioned it, who had carved her name in birch, and left it for her to find, and then waited, quietly, the way the mountains wait, with the absolute patience of something that has nowhere else to be. She reached into her coat pocket. The little bird was smooth and warm from being carried. She set it in her palm between them. "I don't have any money to pay you for the season," she said. Her voice was steady, steadier than she expected. Dane looked at the bird, then at her. Something behind his eyes shifted, the same slow tectonic movement she had seen the night with the lean-to, when she had held the timber and not let go. "Didn't ask for money," he said. "I know." She reached up and pressed her palm flat against his chest. Beneath the wool, beneath the weight of him, his heart was not slow and steady. It was fast. It had been fast this whole time. He stood very still, and she could feel his pulse against her palm. "I came west to start over," she said quietly. "I didn't think starting over would look like this." "What does it look like?" he asked. The words were rough. Careful, in the way that careful things are when they matter. Lark looked up at him. "It looks like staying." He closed his eyes for one long second. When he opened them, the careful flatness was gone. What was underneath it was not complicated and not difficult to read. It was, in fact, the simplest thing she had seen on a human face in years. He brought his hand up and covered hers against his chest, his broad, calloused fingers closing around it, pressing it more firmly against the beat of him. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. The eaves stopped dripping sometime before noon. The sun came out for the first time in weeks and threw long gold bars of light through the cabin's single window. In the lean-to, the horse shifted its weight and blew a long breath through its nose, satisfied with something. Lark had come west to escape what was behind her. She had fallen into a river and lost everything she'd packed for the journey. She had leaned back against a man she didn't know and found, improbably, that he did not let her fall. Starting over, she understood now, was never about having the right things with you. It was about landing in the right place. She had landed.